somebody comes into your house and tells you how you're going to do something, how does that make you feel? So there's all of that. And one of the neat things through history that we've always seen people do is to make declarations about other people's behavior that they have no ability or actual intent to enforce. There's no way in the free world that you can enforce, these things that we say about other countries. We call them sanctions, and we call them whatever we call them. But like, for instance, the rhetoric in the North of the abolitionists, which was to paint a picture of the Southern people that had slaves in a particular light, and the people in the South who painted abolitionists as people who just don't understand how you get things done, you know?
Mhm.
And all of that said, when it comes right down to it, um, both points of view were not only sure they were right, but they were sure they were willing to die for it. Whatever
Mhm.
it actually was that they didn't understand about each other, fighting became the only method that the masses could support their way of life, the history of it, whatever. And the at the end of the day, what came afterwards was absolutely horrible for everybody involved. So that's one of the things. But there was nobody in that whole equation, if you will, who was using new thinking. There was no new thought
No,
going on. There was no, for me to shoot you is like me chopping two of my fingers off. Why would I do a thing like that? And I didn't feel like we were behaving that way with each other 25, 30 years ago, Ken. I don't know what your experience was, but it seemed like we got to be better listeners, at some point.
well, I think that, it's kind of like, I'm a football fan, and no one really talks about the ugly when they're winning. But when things start going wrong, all of a sudden the ugly that was there anyway, some people start, you know, airing that out. So, and we certainly have a lot more, a, a few people can get very, very loud now and be heard, regardless of how representative their voice is of how most people think,
Right.
and so, and we're also, I mean, something happens on the other side of the planet and we know 30 seconds after it happens. It wasn't like that 30 years ago. So, so I think there's just part of it is we're just more aware. We're in 24/7 news cycles, and, so we're just better informed, and everyone has a platform. There's no gatekeepers. Anyone can have a platform and say whatever they want. And,
Look at
you
us.
know, and yeah. And, when you're in a heightened state and you're afraid and you're frustrated and you don't know how to deal with the things that are happening, you're, like you said, you're now in an emotional state.
Yeah.
And, so things that appeal to and reinforce your emotional state are the things that you're going to pay attention to and listen to and focus on and feed your attention to. And it's just going to get worse and worse. But it's funny because so if I were, if I lived upstream from my neighbors and I invented some new way of washing my laundry and I was dumping my dirty laundry water in the stream, and then my neighbor came to me after a year and said, hey, whatever you're dumping into my stream is actually making my whole family sick, you know? And now I'm going to have a response to that, and either I'm going to say, well, then move, screw you. It's, I could say that, or I could say, I am so sorry, let me adjust what I'm doing so that I can care for my neighbor, not just for myself. Yes, this is easy and convenient for me and maybe even profitable for me in some way. But it's hurting people. And I didn't know that. And now I know that. So I'm going to stop. But what if the neighbor comes up and says, you've been conspiring to intentionally hurt me and my family? You did this and you should be punished. You should be penalized for it. You should have known better. And maybe I didn't. Maybe I had some suspicions, but I didn't really know. So, that's the type of situation where now there's tension where, you got to wonder how often do the things that we're all screaming about right now that are second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth order consequences that involve multiple generations of people making decisions in real time for hundreds of years, I mean, was it really all malicious? I'm sure some of it was, absolutely. Some of it was selfish. Some of it was knowing there was going to be an impact. But how much of it was just accumulation of decisions and blind spots that led you to where you are? So, so now you're faced with, you've been on the receiving end of the bad decisions, and you got to decide whether or not you really want to advocate for solutions moving forwards, or focus on being angry about what got you there, or punishing people for getting there. And I'm not saying that's even wrong. I'm just saying, so now if you've inherited this system that's unfair in some way from someone else's perspective, are you being attacked? Are you being asked to respond to changes in the environment and, like you said, engage in new thinking? Or are you just being told that it doesn't matter what you do, you're at fault? So why should you have new thinking then? So, and you go back and forth like this. So like you said, it's just, it takes a willingness for everyone to focus on, solutions and understanding where someone's coming from. You're not going to find an upstream solution if the downstream neighbor is only interested in punishment and the upstream neighbor is only interested in doing what's right for them and they don't care about anyone else. You'll never resolve that, never. There's just someone, they both have to agree to find some kind of middle ground. What was that thing about compromise? A good compromise is when everyone's in agreement but no one's really happy.
Yeah, where all parties are equally unhappy or
Yeah.
equally dissatisfied. Yeah.
And I'd rather see, I'd rather do the hard work to find the solution that's not yet known, where everybody can be happy, and maybe that doesn't exist, but it's worth working towards, and that's what I always look for in relationships. It's like, look, I want you to be happy and I don't want to be unhappy. And if we can find a way to not compromise, but to think a little deeper, get a little clearer on what we both really want here, then maybe we find the better solution that neither of us have thought of yet, if we work together by joining our two perspectives with clarity and understanding being at the forefront and respect.
So here's what I say is missing. Any training about how to drop back from a situation and go for win-win.
Oh
There,
yeah.
it's just not even talked about any longer. We're in a situation now where the whole institutional overreach in terms of behaviors, uh, it's mind-boggling to the degree that people are being trained how to interact with each other in the workplace or in government, or education or those sort of things. And I think what we're talking about here is, um, let's just take old thought and call it what it is. It was the art of dominating and being dominated. Okay, there were winners and losers, there were oppressed and oppressors. That's old thought. Always, you never lose unless you win, right? You never win unless you lose. But and you have to be one or the other of those. There is no in the middle. There is no tie goes to the whatever. It comes down to a philosophical thought that has to come from new age thinking from the 1800s on, where people are going, let's both agree this isn't working. Now let's start over from scratch and let's have a whole new conversation about what you really want and what I really want and how we can bring that into being together, which is what you just said. So now all of that going on, we have a completely different take on the world. Our culture is no longer the culture of, let's just say, Our country, okay? Our country now has international ingredients to it that nobody voted on. I don't remember anybody coming to me and asking my permission to take um, uh, a group plural and make it singular like the Brits do. I mean, like when you think about how you and I were raised, okay, Ford has 40,000 employees worldwide. But now it's Ford have 40,000 employees worldwide. What is up with that? Well, what's up with that is a lot of things. Whenever somebody is able to convince a people that their way of speaking is inferior or needs to be upgraded or needs to subjugate itself to another way of speaking, something's going on. Okay. And I'll tell you what, whenever people tell you words you can and can't say, which remember the George Carlin deal with the 7 words you can't say on TV? I want to submit to you that is really archaic, and there's nobody alive right now who even would say, why did they ever say stuff like that? I mean, you can say any damn thing you want to on TV.
Yep.
So here we are, and we start to see that the methodology of the old thinking in terms of domination and slavery around the world for as long back as there's recorded history, on every continent, in every area, there's always been slavery. And that doesn't make slavery good or bad. It just makes it part of the scenery. And with that in mind, this is really the first country in the world that ever said, we're not doing that here anymore. Kind of interesting. And the only reason that I used this to talk about was as we come into that old way of thinking, this was new thought in the middle of the 1800s, right? And quite frankly, we started thinking of things differently than we did in the past. And kind of the watershed thinking about the future was we are really destined to keep fighting wars over things that don't matter in the long term forever. This is really what our destiny is right now. How about some of us start thinking in terms of win-win being like transformation, win-win like using the energy of the universe for all of our benefit? How about win-win is seeing something that needs to be done and being persuasive with a very strong factual argument, and not just having something that is based on uh, teachings and belief systems and beating it into people until they submit and give up their old way of saying things. I will never say that Ford have 40,000 employees until I die. I promise you that. That's my language. That's the language I was taught in school. That came out of Kate Turabian, which is, the book of grammar and writing style from the 1960s and 70s. So my point is, when you look at the steps that have to go into place in order to start, the domination by a minority of people, a small group of people takes control of everyone else by doing a couple of different things. First, change the language. Change the language and enforce compliance as you go along so that people either sound odd when they're not speaking the new language that you're teaching them, or when you teach them, they don't know what you mean. When you tell them the words and what those words mean now, or the new words that you're bringing into existence, leave them in this state of discomfort, of despair, of not being listened to. No, we don't care what you think. You will learn our language, and this is how you're going to get ahead. This is how you're going to not get bad attention, in other words. So like the whole cancel culture is all about controlling language. People are not getting canceled because they did anything. They're only getting canceled because they said something. So that's number one. Number two, control the thought. That comes after controlling the language. When you control the thought and you start to have people who are sensitized and activated, activized, all those sorts of things where they are now no longer